Once upon a time, there was a man named Harold who did not believe in wizards. He had always scoffed at the tales and myths that swirled around his small, isolated village. To him, they were nothing more than the products of overactive imaginations and the fears of simpler times. However, after hearing numerous stories from the villagers, curiosity gnawed at him. Could there be a grain of truth hidden within those outlandish tales? One cold, moonless night, Harold decided to put his skepticism to the test. He took an old wooden table, placed it in the middle of the desolate road that led to the forest, and set the candles upon it. The road was known for its eerie silence and the unsettling feeling that it evoked in those who dared to traverse it after dark. Harold sat at the table and waited, the flickering candlelight casting long, wavering shadows around him. Hours passed, and the night grew colder. The wind howled through the trees, and the darkness seemed to thicken, pressing in on Harold from all sides. Just as he was about to give up and go home, he saw two shadows moving toward him from the depths of the forest. He squinted, trying to make out their forms in the dim light. As they drew nearer, he realized with a start that these were no ordinary shadows. The first was a grotesque, misshapen bird, its feathers matted and eyes glowing with a sinister light. The second was even more terrifying, a hulking figure, with the twisted features of a demon and the body of a wolf. The werewolf bird and the werewolf devil stopped before the table, their presence radiating an aura of malevolence. Harold's heart pounded in his chest, but he forced himself to remain calm. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice trembling despite his efforts to sound brave. The werewolf devil stepped forward, its eyes locking onto Harold's with an intensity that made him shiver. "I am a harbinger of nightmares," it growled, its voice a low, rumbling snarl. "And I have a story to tell you, a story of betrayal, rage, and death." Harold swallowed hard, but nodded for the creature to continue. The werewolf devil began its tale, its voice echoing in the stillness of the night. "There once was an old man who lived with his grandson and his grandson's wife in a small, ramshackle house on the outskirts of a village much like yours. The old man was frail and weak, his body ravaged by time and toil. One winter night, a bitter cold descended upon the land, freezing everything in its grasp. The grandson's wife, a kind-hearted woman, could not bear to see the old man suffer in the cold. She asked him to lie down next to her in the bed to keep warm, an act of simple compassion. But fate, it seems, is rarely so kind. The grandson, returning home late from his work, entered the house to find his wife and his grandfather lying together. Blinded by a sudden, irrational fury, he saw not an act of kindness but a betrayal of the worst kind. Consumed by rage, he flew at the old man, his fists hammering down in a frenzy of violence. The wife screamed, trying to pull him away, but her efforts were in vain. The old man, too weak to defend himself, succumbed to the brutal assault. His last breath left his body in a soft sigh, a ghost of warmth in the freezing air. The grandson, his rage spent, stared down at his bloodied hands in horror, realizing too late what he had done. The wife, tears streaming down her face, cradled the old man's lifeless body, her sobs the only sound in the cold, silent room. But death was not the end for the old man. His spirit, filled with sorrow and anger, lingered in the house. Strange things began to happen. The air grew colder still, shadows moved on their own, and an eerie, mournful wail could be heard in the dead of night. The grandson, tormented by guilt and haunted by the spirit of his grandfather, began to lose his mind. He claimed to see the old man's ghost staring at him with accusing eyes, following him wherever he went. One night, driven to the brink of madness, the grandson fled into the forest, hoping to escape the vengeful spirit. But the forest was a place of ancient magic, and it had a darkness all its own. The grandson never returned, and it is said that his screams can still be heard on the wind, a warning to all who dare to venture into those cursed woods. The werewolf devil's tale ended, and silence fell once more. Harold sat frozen, the horror of the story sinking into his bones. He looked up at the creature, his mind reeling with questions, but before he could speak, the werewolf devil and the werewolf bird began to dissolve into the shadows from which they had come. "Wait," Harold called out. "What happened to the wife? What became of her?" The werewolf devil turned back, its eyes glinting with a dark, knowing light. "Some stories," it said softly, "are better left unfinished." With that, the shadows enveloped the creatures completely, and they vanished into the night, leaving Harold alone at the table with only the dying light of the candles to keep him company. He sat there for a long time, pondering the tale and the unsettling feeling that something more sinister lay just beyond the edges of the story he had heard. And in the silence, he wondered if he had invited something far darker into his life than he had ever intended. Harold remained at the table, the chilling tale replaying in his mind. The candles flickered, casting eerie shadows that seemed to dance and twist with malevolent intent. He tried to shake off the lingering sense of dread, but the night seemed to hold its breath, waiting for something unseen. As the hours dragged on, Harold could no longer ignore the cold that had seeped into his bones. He stood, his legs stiff and trembling, and decided to leave the table behind. The darkness seemed to press in around him as he made his way back down the road toward the village. The trees whispered secrets to the wind, and the night was alive with an unseen presence that made his skin crawl. Harold reached his home, but the sense of unease followed him inside. He bolted the door and sat by the fire, hoping its warmth and light would drive away the darkness that clung to him. Sleep did not come easily, and when it finally did, his dreams were plagued by images of the old man's ghost, the twisted forms of the werewolf bird and the werewolf devil, and the forest that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. Days turned into weeks, but the memory of that night refused to fade. Harold found himself drawn to the edge of the forest, staring into its depths with a mixture of fear and curiosity. He began to notice changes in the village. People whispered about strange noises in the night, and several reported seeing ghostly apparitions at the edge of the woods. The atmosphere grew tense, and an air of foreboding settled over the community. One evening, unable to resist the pull any longer, Harold decided to venture into the forest. He told himself it was to find answers, to uncover the truth behind the stories, but a part of him knew it was more than that. Something was calling to him, something ancient and dark that lurked within the heart of the woods. With a lantern in hand, he stepped into the forest. The trees closed around him, their branches forming a tangled canopy that blocked out the moonlight. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decay, and the silence was oppressive. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves seemed amplified, echoing through the darkness. Harold walked deeper into the forest, the path becoming less defined and more treacherous. He stumbled over roots and ducked under low-hanging branches, his lantern casting a feeble circle of light that did little to dispel the shadows. As he moved forward, he felt a growing sense of being watched, of unseen eyes tracking his every step. After what felt like hours, he came upon a clearing. In the center stood a crumbling stone altar, covered in moss and surrounded by a ring of ancient, twisted trees. The air was colder here, and Harold's breath misted in the lantern light. He approached the altar, drawn by an inexplicable compulsion. As he reached out to touch the weathered stone, a voice broke the silence. "You should not have come here, Harold." He spun around, his heart leaping into his throat. Standing at the edge of the clearing was a figure cloaked in shadows, its features obscured. The voice was low and gravelly, tinged with a strange resonance that seemed to vibrate in the air. "Who are you?" Harold demanded, trying to keep his voice steady. The figure stepped forward, and as it did, the shadows seemed to peel away, revealing an old man with eyes that glowed faintly in the dim light. His face was lined with age, but his presence was powerful, commanding respect and fear in equal measure. "I am the guardian of this forest," the old man said, his gaze piercing. "You have stirred forces that were meant to remain undisturbed. The tale you heard was but a fragment of a much larger, darker story." Harold swallowed hard. "What do you mean? What story?" The guardian sighed, a sound heavy with centuries of sorrow. "Long ago, this forest was a place of great magic, a sanctuary for beings both benign and malevolent. But something changed, something corrupted the heart of the woods. The spirits here became restless, vengeful, and those who entered rarely left unscathed." Harold's mind raced. The old man and his grandson, were they part of this? The guardian nodded slowly. Their tragedy was a symptom of the forest's curse. The grandson's rage and the old man's sorrow fed the darkness, binding their spirits here. And now, you have drawn their attention. A cold shiver ran down Harold's spine. "What can I do? How do I fix this?" The guardian's eyes gleamed with a mixture of hope and warning. "There is a way, but it is fraught with danger. You must uncover the truth of the forest's corruption, find the source, and cleanse it. Only then will the spirits find peace, and the curse be lifted. Harold's resolve hardened. Tell me what I need to do. The guardian raised a hand, pointing deeper into the forest. Follow the path to the heart of the woods. There, you will find an ancient tree, older than any other. Beneath its roots lies the source of the corruption. Be warned, the journey will test you, and the darkness will fight to keep its hold. Harold nodded, determination etched on his face. He turned toward the path the guardian had indicated, his lantern held high. As he stepped forward, the guardian's voice echoed behind him. Remember, Harold, the forest has a will of its own. Trust nothing and no one. With those words ringing in his ears, Harold plunged into the depths of the forest, unaware of the true horrors that awaited him. The night grew darker, the trees thicker, and the air colder as he journeyed toward the heart of the woods, where the ancient tree and the source of the curse lay hidden. But as he walked, he couldn't shake the feeling that the story was far from over, and that the true nightmare had only just begun. Harold walked deeper and deeper into the forest, each step getting harder. The darkness was getting thicker, the trees were getting closer, and the air was getting colder. But his determination did not fade. He felt that the fate of the village depended on his success, and he could not let his neighbors down. Finally, he reached the heart of the forest. A huge ancient tree towered in front of him, surrounded by a gloomy aura. Its roots meandered deep into the ground, as if feeding on the darkness itself. Harold knew that beneath those roots was the source of the curse. Summoning all his courage, he began to dig, throwing aside the wet earth and tangled roots. His hands were covered in blood and dirt, but he didn't stop. Suddenly, he bumped into something solid. It was an old, rust-covered chest sealed with ancient runes. Harold opened the chest and found an ancient amulet inside, emitting a soft, warm light. He immediately realized that this was the key to saving the forest. The amulet was created to maintain a balance between light and darkness, but its magic has been distorted by time and malice. Suddenly, the darkness around the tree began to thicken, and a figure appeared in front of Harold, an evil creature, the embodiment of the curse of the forest. The creature bared its teeth and rushed at Harold, but he did not flinch, picked up the amulet. His light flashed, illuminating the entire clearing and pushing away the darkness. The creature howled and disappeared, disappearing into thin air. The tree shook, and its roots began to return to the ground. Harold felt the forest around him come alive, getting rid of the darkness. He returned to the village at dawn, tired but full of hope. The inhabitants, seeing him, rushed to him with joy. Since then, the forest has ceased to be an ominous place, and the spirits have found peace. The village came to life. People were no longer afraid of the night, and the bright amulet, now shining in the village square, reminded everyone of the power of kindness and courage. Many years have passed, and Harold has become a local legend, an example for everyone. He proved that even in the darkest times, you can find light if you are not afraid to meet your fears and fight for what you hold dear. And they lived happily ever after, remembering that night as the beginning of a new, bright era for their village. The forest has once again become a place for walking and playing, and the spirits who once suffered have found peace in eternal peace.